We're back.
Just like that, we're back, and we're now moving into our second conversation for the morning. Belize celebrates Virtual Europe Day 2020. We've got the ambassador in with us to tell us all about it. That's Malgorzata Wasilewska. I think I got it correctly. Good morning.
Good morning. It is very well.
Thank you so very much. I feel that's an 80%. So we looked at this and reading it out. Belize celebrates Virtual Europe Day. People might say, what is Virtual Europe Day 2020? And doing some read up, it simply means that when we became a part of the European Union. So let's get into a brief history of it and how we celebrate.
Thank you so much for having me this morning and for giving me an opportunity to do this virtual celebration. Virtual because, unfortunately, I'm not able to come to Belize. I used to be a frequent visitor. I was in Belize every 2 or 3 months,
Wow.
so missing it terribly.
We miss you.
Thank you. On May the 9th, every year, Europe celebrates the establishment of European Union because it was on the 9th of May, back in 1950, so 70 years ago, that then the French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman delivered a speech in Paris where he presented his vision for a new political and economic cooperation in Europe. This idea, of course, came out of all the unfortunate events of the Second World War. So Europe in itself is a peace project. So as you see, there's plenty to celebrate. Next year we will have 70 years since the first treaty was signed. So it's a very special celebration for us because I'm sure you'll agree that until today, Europe is not only the most successful peace project in the world, but also the most successful integration project, or regional integration project in the world. So it is a moment for us Europeans to reflect on and recommit to the founding principles of what Europe is all about: peace, democracy, and very importantly, international solidarity. This solidarity is particularly important in 2020 because the motto for us today in the middle of the pandemic is stronger together.
Wow.
You know, it is such a unique time, and I think that when you think of the integration process and the concept behind it in kind of having that solidarity with your neighbors, we're seeing that on the ground level, and we're also seeing it between countries as well. So I think it really puts it into perspective. But had we not been talking about the pandemic, perhaps this Europe Day celebration would have been distinctly different as the rollout of Brexit was unfolding.
Yeah.
It seems to have kind of fallen off the radar, at least for the rest of the world. I don't know about in Europe. How do you put that into perspective when you celebrate?
Well, the Europe of the remaining 27 countries is very strong, and of course it is very sad to see one member state leaving. But for me, in particular, as a Polish citizen and relatively new member state in the Union, I have seen for myself how much my country, my people have benefited from joining the European Union. When I look at the generation of my son, who is 27 today, they really feel European. They embrace what the diversity and the richness of cultures, languages, the proximity of countries, the open borders, the possibility to study and work across Europe, what it really gives to them. So not just economically, but also politically, the values of democracy have made an enormous difference in my country coming out of communism. So the stronger together for Europe is one thing, but the stronger together in terms of partnerships, in terms of relationships with countries like Belize and other countries that I cover in the region is particularly important today because of the incredible impact of the COVID-19 virus on the world, and sadly, so many people have already died from it.
Wow.
And, I think of all the support that Belize has benefited from the relationship with the European Union.
Apologies.
We're going to you have to tell them that we're just more important,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Tell them you love Belize and Belize is
Show that Belizean love. But I was saying, Ambassador, that, I think each time we have you here, we get to be able to look at the amount of support that we have been able to benefit from the European Union. And even in the midst of facing the pandemic in your own, within the countries in Europe, you have managed to be able to put together some funds to help us in this region. Talk to us about that.
Well, our partnership is more than 30 years strong. And over that period of time, European Union has provided more than 200 million euro in financial and technical assistance to Belizean people. So that's quite a sum. It rolls off the tongue so easily, but it's a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
And over the years, a lot went on infrastructure, sugar and banana industries, and so on. But this year, because of the COVID pandemic, we have globally immediately try to refocus and rethink the money that is already allocated for countries in order to assist with fighting the pandemic. So in Belize, the EU is assisting through the Ministry of Health with more than 1 million euro for the response to COVID through flexible basically, our procedures are known for being quite cumbersome and difficult, but we have opened up unprecedented flexibility so that we could move funding, and that million in Belize is mainly used for the personal protective equipment and supplies to regional hospitals to further strengthen the response to the outbreak and to help to contain it, which of course, as we know, has been very successfully done in Belize.
Yeah. And so while we're on the topic, and it's so nice to know that we could be a part of such governing or such body. When it comes to the tourism aspect of things, we know that for the most part the Caribbean is heavily we focus there. That's one of our biggest focus. What's the conversation like right now with member countries in terms of how we'll go forward with tourism in the EU?
Well, it's a bit too early to have those conversations because unlike Belize, for example, the rest of the region is still struggling with the virus. Belize is the only country that I'm aware of that is in clear, and I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate the government of Belize, in particular Ministry of Health, for responding and containing the spread of the virus so quickly. The other countries have not been so lucky yet, so the borders are still closed, and there are first conversations as to when the borders should open. We have in the European Union focused first of all on the response. And we are also at the end of a current financial cycle. Our assistance comes in certain periods of time. So we should be now having a conversation with the respective governments on what would be the priorities from 2021 and how we should focus our bilateral assistance. You know that our assistance comes in the form of grants. They're not loans, but they're grants for the period post 2020. I'm pretty certain in all the countries that have been affected, we will be talking about how to help the governments in restarting the economy and recovering from the pandemic. But those conversations are not there yet, partly because we don't know yet how the spread of virus will affect some of the countries, but also because our own budgets have not been approved. As you know, Europe unfortunately has suffered hugely from the pandemic and is still struggling with it. So the budgets have not been approved as yet. But I'm sure we will have these conversations. In the meantime, we had already, for the current cycle, prioritized health sector as a priority sector for the current cooperation programs. And under the health sector, we are funding refurbishment of 3 regional hospitals, Orange Walk, Belmopan, and Dandriga, and 2 community hospitals in Corozal and Punta Gorda, as well as the Central Medical Laboratory in Belize City. We will also be helping to upgrade the Belize health information system. May I just add that the priorities that are selected for support are not imposed by us. It's always a conversation with the government, and whatever government deems a priority for the forthcoming future, we mutually agree, if we see the added value, that would be where our support would go. We also are supporting energy sector as a big sector. That's still under preparation, and it will provide solar energy to rural communities in the southern districts, which are not connected to the grid. And then we have a much smaller amount of money on public finance management, where we are helping to strengthen the Office of the Auditor General, the Internal Audit Unit, and Contractor General's Office. There is also one other program which at the moment is delayed, but we really look forward to it restarting, and it's a Spotlight initiative, Spotlight on family violence. And again, because of the challenges that the COVID pandemic has brought, part of the funding under that will be refocused to address issues specifically related to COVID, because in many countries around the world, there is a rise of domestic violence, unfortunately, because of the pandemic.
Definitely.
You know, you spoke of all the plans that were in place, and with the beginning of 2020, we started to see restrictions on movements and just the impact of the pandemic. So where does that leave us in terms of the status of the rollout? I mean, do you just put plans on hold until 2021, or it's a wait and see as we go along?
Well, things get a little bit delayed, but because we can relax some of our strict procedures, hopefully it will not impact it too much. But as you know, a lot of things are on hold. Life is on hold, you could almost say. I think we're still awaiting the announcement that the House will approve new measures in Belize, which will be less strict. So hopefully things will relax a little bit. But there will be also more relaxed approach to deadlines, because everybody understands that there are limitations. So I think over a longer period of time, the implementation will not suffer too much, because obviously the support both to health and energy in particular is badly needed in Belize. How it will impact on new priorities and new budgets and what they will be, it is still too early to say. But as I said, I'm pretty certain restarting the economy will be a priority. Tourism is a major source of income for majority of the countries. But don't forget that we are, and I'm very worried about it, I'm almost holding my breath. We're a step away from the hurricane season. Yes. So let's just hope and pray that under the shock of the pandemic and its impact on people, on economies, that the hurricane season will be gentle and will spend.
Yeah, we do share, of course, that same concern.
Same sentiment, yeah.
And you know, you spoke of relaxation of deadlines, but you know, I think it's a hard time to be able to talk about what we know exists, and some of the protocols in terms of how contracts are given out, and just the due diligence that is done, especially with grant money, like from the European Union, is always something that we have a concern about. And when you're in an emergency, decisions can be made ad hoc or perhaps faster, but you do still have all your checks and balances in order, right?
Absolutely. We have an excellent cooperation with the government of Belize and with the Office of the National Authorizing Officer. They're very familiar with our rules, and don't worry, we have a responsibility, just like the government. We have a responsibility to be accountable, transparent. So the relaxation is only in terms of being able to move funds to where the greatest need is, and to extend some deadlines, simplify some procedures, but by no means would we stop paying attention to how the money is spent and what on. There I have no concerns whatsoever.
Excellent. And looking at maybe just shifting timelines, we know right now of all the things that the development cooperation does include, it is wonderful that we were already planning, or you were already planning on being able to make this investment in our healthcare system. Is it perhaps going to be looked at to prioritize that before all the other commitments that have been made?
Well, as I said, the health sector is already a priority and is getting quite a substantial amount of funding. What will be the priorities beyond? We would need beyond this period. We would need to restart the conversations with the government, because the pre-pandemic and post-pandemic conversations will be very different. Prior to this, we were looking at issues of crime and security, for example. Post COVID-19. I would imagine that support to economy and recovery of economy and tourism sector we might need to look how if at all we could assist that, because we're not always best placed to support every sector, because even if you reopen the borders, even if you reopen the hotels, you've got to have people coming. And how the world will behave and to what extent we will all be traveling the same way as we were before, it's still too early to say. What kind of security measures you have to put at the airports, in aeroplanes? Will the companies be able to afford distancing on a plane? So many have already gone bankrupt. I think there are too many questions. There are more questions than answers. So I think one step at a time.
One step at a time.
We do understand how difficult the timings are. And while the conversation continues, I think one of the things, as much as, when it comes to the whole COVID-19 situation, it's very tough upon the entire world, especially more so on our sister countries in the EU. But rebuilding and the conversation of agriculture, especially for Belize being one of those countries with tremendous potential. Are there any conversations along that line in the EU, with the EU and various governments, in terms of rebuilding? Are there any conversations there?
Well, there are already reflections, but of course it's easier to follow them when you are in Brussels. But there are some reflections how EU reacted and whether EU stood together and whether all our solidarity internally really stood to the test. As you know, the borders were closed in many countries. Some countries closed the borders completely. Others closed the borders but allowed movement inside European Union, whether single markets delivered as would have been expected, and so on. And again, these reflections will continue, but at the moment, Europe is not free of the virus yet, and very sadly, people are still dying. What we have done, though, is we have, you may have heard that there was a pledging conference together with many international partners, and Europe managed to raise 7.5 billion euro to support research worldwide to find a vaccine and effective medication for this. And that is an effort to not just focus on competing with each other, whether it will be Canada first or Singapore or New Zealand or somebody else, but just to pull all our resources together and make sure that the best of experts can work effectively to to find a solution, and that is a sign of solidarity. When it comes to things like agriculture, I completely agree with you that there has to be a reflection by each country, but I think the region here needs a reflection on why Caribbean isn't better at feeding itself, where you are so lucky to be living in climate and countries where, as a friend of mine says, you can put a stick in the ground and it grows into a tree. Why is there no more sustainable food production? And we have to look at, for example, at our economic partnership agreement. Why is it so expensive to bring goods from Europe? When I go to a supermarket here on Belize and I find something that costs me a euro or euro and a half, let's say a piece of cheese, and I pay 6 or 7 or 10 euro for it in the countries in the region. Why is it so expensive? We are supposed to be having no tariffs at the moment. It's 10 years since we signed one of the most comprehensive economic partnerships agreements in the world, and it's still so difficult to bring products either way and make them affordable. So there'll be many conversations, I think, that each country will have to have internally with partners, and then regions, and then region to region.
All right. So, Ambassador, is there anything else you'd like to share with us? Probably we've missed or.
Well, as I said, I am extremely impressed and would like to congratulate the government of Belize for controlling this terrible virus so effectively. I look forward, and I hope that the borders will reopen before the end of the summer when I'm due to finish my term. And I look forward to coming back to Belize and at least one more time before it's time for me to move on. And I hope by that time a lot would have reopened, and despite fears that there will be many tourists coming back to beautiful Belize as soon as possible, because we all know how much it is needed. Absolutely. So I will wear my blue very proudly on that last visit, the colors of Europe. And maybe we will get a chance to meet again.
Yes, we do hope so. And of course, we do hope you're staying safe as well.
All right. Ambassador, thank you so very much. And it's always nice to see you. And like you mentioned, hopefully we get to see you soon. All right?
Yeah. All right.
My warmest greetings to everyone in Belize.
All right. Thank you so very much. That was a wonderful conversation with Ambassador Malgorzata Wasilewska. I think I got it correctly. In terms of Belize celebrating Virtual Europe Day 2020.
That's right. Now we are going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, how do we relieve the stress that you've been feeling? Of course, there's lots of pandemic stress. The spas are closed, so we're going to give you some at-home tips of how to gain that relaxation. That's coming up after the break, so stay tuned.